What's the biggest red flag you have seen on a first date? Introduced me to her ex of 9 years and was visibly in his late 50s, perhaps 60s. She explained she hadn't been with him for a few years. She was 26. My mental math isn't great, so I just asked when they started dating. She very candidly told me when she was 13. She then got blackout wasted, told me how he made CP of her made out him. I began my egress to the bar to pay and realized she had charged drinks of his onto my card. I explained I was leaving as politely as I could and she went into full hysteria. This was in the span of less than 10 minutes. Not as big as some of the other ones here, but a first date being more like a job interview than a date. Asked me my dating sexual history in depth, my moral and political values, how I feel relationships should be monetarily, etc. etc. I get those are all important things to be on the same page with as a partner, but a first date should just be shooting the shit. Things won't work out if we aren't able to enjoy each other's company without having some deep philosophical discussion. Emo. He pointed to another woman at the bar and said she was his ex. But she happened to be my lesbian roommate. Edit. Yes, I told him I knew he was full of shit cause she was my roommate, and I pointed out her girlfriend who was there with her. I don't remember what he said exactly, but he had no choice but to admit he was lying. I wish I had asked why he said it. I assume to make me jealous? Like that's a good way to start a relationship? Obviously that was the only date. It's pretty mild compared to a lot of other examples, but she cut me off, a lot. I could barely finish a sentence. I'm pretty good at conversation, I'm happy to listen and I wait for pauses to speak. She'd chat a bit, pause, it was a clear moment for me to say my thoughts. I'd get 2-3 of the way through a sentence, and she'd cut me off. Maybe to agree, maybe to disagree, but I never got to finish what I was saying. A couple of months ago I went on a date with a guy who was very passionate about his work. At first I really appreciated that. But it didn't take me long enough to figure out that it wasn't the passion, it was narcissism. He just kept on blabbering about himself and his job and I didn't get a chance to say anything the entire time. He would also gaslight me for my views just because he thought they were inappropriate. Went on a date with a guy from Hinge. He had her baby mama, and just could not stop himself from complaining about her the whole time. He was getting angry, and really scared me. If he was like that without her around, I could only imagine how vicious he would be during a fight. I understand some people really hurt you, but don't get into a relationship if you're having issues with people. Figure it out first. Brought her friends along. They were seated at a different table. I found out they were there when 3 waitresses came up to our table carrying a cupcake with a candle in it while clapping and singing happy birthday. Her friends sent them and it wasn't that her birthday. Actually the extreme tardiness, Brillo pad hair and yellow teeth should have been the first red flags, but I thought I'd give her a chance anyway. Picked her up from her place and drove to an outdoor mall nearby. I was totally unfamiliar with the area so I had the nav on. She commented on how she's a great driver and I could just follow her directions instead of using the nav. I said great, but I like having it on in unfamiliar areas anyway because it makes me feel safe. A few minutes later she turned it off herself saying you can trust me. Nah. We made plans to go see a band together, and when she showed up, her husband was until they were separated. I was young and dumb, stuck it out, even told myself I was the problem, that I wasn't modern enough. Nope. Should have gone with my gut because the relationship that followed was a mess. Older me looks back and sees the red flag, yes, but younger me was smitten. You live and you learn, hopefully. I don't know how to describe my relationship to alcohol without sounding like an alcoholic. Ha ha. But that's okay, my entire family drinks too, it's kind of our tradition. We argue a lot. As a non-drinker, I just immediately knew that it would probably not work out with that one. Girl was in a similar field and I'd model level looks, but I could never be happy with such a heavy drinker. We were talking about both liking stand-up comedy and she asked who my 5 favorites were. I listed them and her response was, what? No women? Sorry, but there's too many comedians out there to get hung up on some inclusive top 5. I could list a few female comedians I really enjoy, but questioning me like my choices were potentially founded in sexism or something felt like a flag. Took me to the restaurant that he worked at but lied to me about his job, so I was unaware and the entire wait staff was being so extra and I felt very uncomfortable until finally I got him to admit that he worked there and everyone serving us was his friend and they were watching us the whole time. Sad thing is the restaurant was very good, but now I feel too awkward to ever go back. Ex-boyfriend, all friends are guys cause doesn't get along with women lol, smiley face, no manners. Cursing at parents definitely a no. Gold digger, if it's not a high-end item like Gucci, I don't want it at all. By there, you born with Gucci or high-end items on her ass TF. Looking down and talking down on people, but you're a bimbo who can't work and expect to be taken care of. Annoying AF. The guy invited me over to his parents' house to see an antique. I drove myself to see it. I made sure his parents were home. I was a little old for that, but sensed a disturbance in the force. As it turned out, it was the car his parents drove on their honeymoon and never drove again. He said it would be our honeymoon car. Exit stage left and screeching tires. First date, blind date set up by a colleague. Exchanged messages during the day about how we'd recognize each other, easily noticeable stuff like what we'd be wearing, hair color, etc. He told me he was 6 foot tall. When he turned up, he was like 5 feet 9 inches or 5 feet 10 inches. How dumb do you have to be to lie about something that's going to be verified in a few hours? Didn't bother seeing him again. This was more so after the date, but we went out for drinks. It was a nice evening. He was getting the night bus home, but he missed it, and the next one wasn't going to be for 3 hours. So for the next 3 hours he proceeded to Snapchat me videos and pictures of him inside a strip club. In the following days he was genuinely shocked when I said no to going on another date. One guy went on a whole cheer about how mass shooters just need to get laid and how if they had sex, they'd probably be less likely to kill people, while staring at me very, very pointedly. He'd been set up on the date with me by a relative. I got the hell out of Dodge and never saw him again after telling the relative to never put him in contact with me. I met a guy from Craigslist back in the day that didn't mention that he had false teeth, and during the coffee date he decided to take out the top teeth and put them in his pocket. He then looked at me and smiled and said to me, "I kiss better without my teeth," and I excused myself to the ladies' room and got the fuck out before he could try and touch me. When he started bragging about getting into a lot of fights and how he beat their asses, turn off. Not manly or mature at all. I got up and said I needed to use the restroom and just left him hanging. It's a turn on when a man can solve a confrontation with simply having a dialogue and shaking the other's hand and just letting it go. That's hot. He took me to his house. He lived with his mom just so he could eat dinner with his mom while I sat in the living room. I listened to them eat and talk about my looks like I couldn't hear them. Apparently, I was pretty but needed to be taken down a peg or two. I said my period had started so I had to go home. A future abuser and his enabler mommy admitted he was married, but she was our cousin, so they had to marry her and she was overseas. Also described his luxury house by emphasizing that he had a separate bathroom from their wife so they never had to see women's stuff. I'd if he meant feminine hygiene products of just makeup. He was actually a nice guy, just, well, culturally distinct. At the time I wasn't drinking, he wasn't either. He admitted he had a problem, and then later when he said that he was looking forward to going to Thailand with his friends and getting absolutely shittered. He also called himself hot and talked about his time on a very small reality TV show. Needless to say, there was no second date. I went out with a guy who had lost his mother to cancer the year prior. I get it, I had lost my dad to cancer 3 years prior. However, he would not stop talking about it and about how broken-hearted he was. It was definitely heavy stuff for a first date and, in my opinion, not the way to get someone interested in a second date. When they purposefully chose a different tip screen to tip 5. The service was absolutely fine and the place was great. Treating workers like that disgusts me. I know tipping culture in NYC can be a little extreme to some, but this person made well over 6 figures and probably at least $200,000. It's not like they couldn't afford it. She treated the waitress like shit. Made comments about how she's inept when the place was packed and she was the only server. Complained about how long it took to get our order in when they were clearly short-staffed. If you treat service people like shit, you've never worked a service job, and I have no respect for that. The first thing she spoke of is marriage. Seriously, we just met and she talks about marriage. I wasn't amused, to say the least. To add insult to injury, so to speak, we ran into an elderly man she knew. It was like I didn't exist. I walked away right then and there. Didn't say a darn thing, I just left. Went to a boba shop just to chat. When we got up to leave, he somehow left his place a mess with used napkins in the boba's drawer wrapper, and I was so shook at the ick I felt. Also, didn't push in his chair lol. Knew I'd have to pick up and clean after him, so that's something I look out for now. I haven't been on many first dates, however, my very first date story is entirely a red flag. He kept trying to put me on his lap in the movie theater and was really forceful about it. I asked him to take me home and he put up a fight about it, but eventually took me home. Never spoke to him again. 1. Talk about a pet better than people. 2. The predominant person in their life is a controlling parent. 3. They bring up their ex without prompting reasonable trigger. In my experience, all 3 of these warning signs are consistent flags across all socioeconomic and ethnic groups. Had a guy who insisted on buying the most expensive pizza at the restaurant despite my protest, then kissed my head when he walked past me to use the restroom. After dinner we walked along the waterfront, he kissed me and then immediately tried to choke me to be sexy. First date, last date. I have met a guy for coffee 14 years ago after connecting online. During the conversation he stated what he thought was a fact. It was not, in fact, a fact. He couldn't handle me pointing out his mistake. It was about something that I specialize in, but he continued to insist he was right. Went to a restaurant. He ordered for me without even asking what I liked. Then, he proceeded to snap his fingers on several different occasions at the waitress. He was from the upper middle class. Met him in a college class, and he seemed so confident. Now I realize it was arrogance. A woman told me her music choices were better than mine, before I even decided to play music, so I shouldn't even play any. Like her picks on Spotify. I'm a musician, producer with a 2x platinum record, and full-time sound engineer. She couldn't have said that to a worse individual. I'd give it was a red flag, but it was off-putting. He didn't pay, which I isn't a problem. But he stood over my shoulder while I paid and said damn, $20 for that. He paid for his own food, ate most of it, then asked for some of mine. Then proceeded to talk about himself the entire time.